Hello, everyone. My name is Fintan Walsh, and I'm the Senior Editor of Theatre Research International. And thank you all for joining us for the launch of issue 46.2, which is on the subject of sounding corporeality. And this will be published in a week or so. So I'm delighted to be joined by the special issue co-editors, which include Aoife McGrath, Marcus Tan, Prathana Porkayasta, Teresa Havelkova, and author Neda Goose. And they're going to preview what's to look forward to in the issue. And then we might also have some questions at the end. So first of all, to the editors and authors, congratulations on this bumper special issue. I'm going to start with Aoife, maybe. And Aoife, maybe you could tell us how this special issue came into being.
Thanks so much, Fintan, and thanks to you. And I saw that Tanya is here, your assistant editor, and all at the TRI team. It's been an absolute delight working with you on this issue. So also thanks so much to you guys. I had to, when I was thinking about preparing for today, I had to do a little email trawl to see how long ago it was that we started this project. And it was 2018, which I could hardly believe. And in 2018, myself and my wonderful co-convener of the Choreography and Corporeality working group, Prathana Porkayasta, we approached you, Fintan, about possibly co-editing a special issue of TRI. And unbeknownst to us, at the same time, the wonderful Marcus Tan and Teresa Havelkova, who are the co-conveners of the Music Theatre Working Group, had also approached you about doing a special issue with their working group. And this is, you had then the idea that maybe we should talk to each other, and that was really the origin of it. And it was, I suppose, something that had been germinating for a while. So myself and Marcus, way back in 2013, had made an unsuccessful bid to a certain renowned UK funding body to look at how we might analyze music and movement together in performance analysis. So for me personally, kind of it had been percolating and growing in my head for a while, but myself and Marcus's project from back in the day, that kind of embryonic project, didn't go anywhere. And our work took us in different places individually. And then when we sat down as 4 co-editors to think about how we might create coherence across our 2 disciplines, we realized that this is such a burgeoning field. So the sound, the consideration sound in the humanities at large are really kind of gaining a really strong foothold, and amazing work was being done on both sides. So in dance scholarship and in music scholarship. But when we did our literature review, we found what we thought was a little gap, in that there aren't that many publications where you have dance scholars reaching out in an interdisciplinary and intermodal fashion to consider music or sound or sonicity on the one hand, or music scholars similarly coming from their disciplinary expertise, reaching out and trying to consider corporeality and embodiment. And we thought this would be just such a brilliant opportunity for us to bring, coming from our own little disciplinary silos, to try and create this bridge and to try and bring these 2 aspects together. And we are kind of in the International Federation for Theatre Research, we are kind of fringe groups anyway. So we are, the crazy dance scholars on the one side and the wonderful music scholars on the other side, and all of us connected by theatre. So our special issue does then actually throw a really wide net across different forms of performance. So not just dance performance, not just music theatre or music performance or opera performance, but also considering theatre, considering installation practices, all different manner of theatre and performance work. So we sent out an open call to our groups and our
Okay, we seem to have lost Eva. We might just wait and see if she comes back to life in a second or so. But now might be a good time to bring in Marcus. Marcus, are you?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
With us. Fantastic. While Eva is sort of her connection.
Yeah, she disappeared.
So it's until it starts to work again. Maybe you could just maybe take up where Eva left off, because she was obviously telling us how this has been part of, or the result of a conversation that's been happening for a very long time between both of you.
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Tell us a little bit about why we do need to think more about the relationship between sound and corporeality.
So I'll just continue where Eva left off first, and then I'll address the question about the importance of considering this relationship. So I think we went back to our own working groups, and we sent out an open call to our working groups. Some responded, and then thereafter we sort of decided which were the strongest papers to take, and then that process took a while. We also felt that there was need to supplement the issue with something that was a little bit different. So the idea of having the dossiers came about. That took a while because we didn't quite know where to hit in terms of dossiers, but then opportunities came along, and we have this wonderful collection of dossiers right now. So I'm sort of simplifying the whole process, which took quite a while actually. And I'm glad that it's done, because like Eva told us, it's been 3 years in the making. So, and there were some delays. We initially had intended to launch this issue last year, but because there were some delays. And so we're glad that it's finally out. So yes, in terms of what was behind the issue in terms of its theoretical, philosophical, or even social direction or trajectory, I think the issue really wants to examine the relationship or the intimacies, as we wrote in the editorial, the intimacies between sound and corporeality. So broadly speaking, we were looking at issues of sonicity in relation to movement, to the body, issues of embodiment. So why is it important? I mean, at a very simple, fundamental level, our bodies are moved by sound, right? Sound is produced by the body, both internally and externally. And of course, the most direct manifestation or distinct manifestation of this is in the ways that rhythm and music moves us, be effectively, emotionally, even physiologically in many ways. And choreography and dance is obviously the most evident relationship, evident of that relationship. But we also were trying to examine relationships that are not so obvious or palpable, and the ways that sound moves us in less apparent ways. Well, the more appropriate ways to say it is the less conscious ways. And then here I'm thinking about ideas that are used in my article, which has to do with ideas of vibration, adapted from Nina Eichem's book, Sensing Sound. So she writes in that book about the idea of encountering sound and music as a kind of vibration, an intermaterial exchange between bodies. And of course, she's using bodies in a broad sense, not just physical, corporeal bodies, but the objects that produce sound as a kind of bodies. So that was what I explored in my paper specifically, the ways in which vibration encodes cultural identities of the performers, the listeners, so that sound in that sense are vibrations to a call of action. So why we think this is an important issue to explore, because I think Eva sort of touched on this briefly. So in music scholarship, there has been increasing focus on sound and motion. And there's a sub-discipline called choreal musicology, actually, which examines the variable relationships between sound and movement, in the ways that these relationships provide insight into perceptual sensibilities, cultural meanings, interpersonal dynamics. There's also growing scholarship in music that looks at gesturing in musical performances, such as what the conductor does, for example, or what they call kinespheric movements in a pianist performance, for example. But in our field, there has been less of that consideration. There is a slow recognition to examine the sonic in performance. We were just talking about this in our working group yesterday, actually, right, Teresa? And not so much written about the relationship or the intimate relationship between sound and movement, sound and corporeality as well. So we thought this issue was important in the ways that we could kickstart a conversation or a broader conversation, considering that intersection or the interrelation between both. So yes, that is the sort of reasons why we felt this issue was important.
Great, thank you, Marcus.
I think Aoife is back.
Is back. Welcome back, Aoife. Teresa, I might just move to you next. You know, obviously, one of the really exciting things about editing a special issue or a book is the kind of surprise connections that emerge that nobody had necessarily expected. What kinds of patterns did cropped up in the articles as you were preparing them for publication?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Fintan, because I think there were some surprising interconnections, but maybe the most obvious thing that all the contributions had in common was a concern with how a reconfiguration of the relationship between sound and body can be mobilized as a means of resistance, of liberation, as a way of fostering ethical intersubjective relationships. This is something Marcus already touched upon. And this especially in relationship to racialized, gendered, differently abled bodies. Listening to how listening, specific modes of listening can be conductive to that sort of ethical relationship. So maybe I can just give a few examples here. Thomas de France, but also some of the contributors in Unsettling Sound look at how Black bodies specifically can affirm their presence through specific interface between sound and body, for example. Or Aoife is looking at the disruptive potential of sounding and embodying maternal bodies, specifically maternal breastfeeding bodies. Annalisa Piccirillo looks at the possibilities of an intersubjective relationship to migrant bodies within the Mediterranean migrant crisis. There is in the dossier a contribution about a performance reassembled slightly askew, where it is the possibility of a shared experience of a invisible disability, actually in this case, that is actually explored and considered. So I think this concern with these different considerations, configurations of sound and image, or sound and body relationship, or sounding and corporeality in relationship to this more general political potential or potential for political intervention. I think that's what the contributions share. But I should also stress that what the issue makes very clear, I think, is that there's no universal recipe, obviously, for a politically productive relationship between sound and body, right? It is a relationship that has to be renegotiated, reconfigured in a specific cultural, social, political context. So I think each of the contributions actually show the different possibilities of how this relationship can actually be nurtured, configured for specific political gains.
Thank you, Teresa. Pratana, you discuss this wonderful like immersive film installation in your conversation piece in the issue. And you're also talking about the relationship between embodiment and sound, but you make a claim in discussing this piece that it has the capacity to decenter the ocular. Could you tell us a little bit about the film that you discuss in your contribution and the ways in which it decenters the ocular and why this might be important for us?
Sure, thank you, Fintan. So the particular film that the film installation piece that I write about, and it's a conversation piece between me and the artist, is a film that was produced in 2001. It's titled Memorial Project Natran. And the artist is a Vietnamese-Japanese-American artist, Jun Nguyen Hatsushiba. But the piece of work, I experienced it in 2018 at the Kochi Biennale in Kerala, and this was just within months of the state being flooded. And so my experience of the visual installation was actually in a warehouse that had been strategically flooded. So you had to wade in through water to experience the film. The film is shot completely underwater. So it's an underwater film of fishermen, Vietnamese fishermen off the coast of Vietnam, diving into the water, pushing and pedaling cyclos or bicycle rickshaws on the bed of the seafloor and then rising up for air. And this particular film is a homage by the artist to the Vietnamese boat people. And for those who might not be aware of that history, between 1975, which is the end of the Vietnam War, between 200 and 400,000 Vietnamamese boat people lost their lives in the South China Sea because of the mass exodus of Vietnamese people out of South Vietnam. So the film tries to pay a homage to the memory of Vietnamese boat people, but the way in which it does it is really interesting. And what I state in the conversation piece and what emerges through the conversation with the artist is that it's done in a way that is not a documentation of trauma and not a representation of historical trauma, but it represents that history and it relives that history in a very particular way. So Jun Nguyen Hatsushiba talks about how he was really attracted to the sounds of no theater, and particularly the dissonant sound of no theater. And he was also very much inspired by Brian Eno, the sound designer, and also by Okinawan music. And within this piece, he talks about how he essentially drew on these ingredients of no theater sounds and Okinawan music. And he split up the frequencies of the sound and then restitched them back and then played the sound in reverse. So as audience, when we view the installation, we actually view the bodies of the Vietnamese divers falling into the water and rising in real time. But the experience of the sound is very different. The sound is actually in reverse and the sound is dissonant. And so what actually emerges out of the conversation in this piece is that the sound essentially creates a space in the environment where a very easy consumption of these mesmeric, beautiful bodies diving and falling and rising in water, that very easy consumption becomes quite a difficult watch. So the sound kind of constantly discombobulates us. And Nguyen Hatsushiba as an artist is particularly interested in the ways in which sound and movement and visuality kind of intersect, and where our visual experience is actually kind of jarred by or informed by the sounds that we hear. And so there is that, as you say, Fintan, there is that sort of not being able to rest with the ocular, but instead to engage with the sonic, which really frames our experience of this work.
Thank you. I mean, it's a really powerful artwork, but also a really, really beautiful and rich conversation on the issue. Neda, I might come to you too. And you also write about an installation, a slightly curving place in Berlin, and you gather together a range of articles that approach this piece from various perspectives. But one of the ideas you introduced for us is this concept of acoustic archaeology. Could you perhaps tell us a little bit about this installation piece and also about this term archaeology, which you use so effectively in your submission?
Mm-hmm. So I guess I'll begin by saying that the project that was presented last year at Haus der Kultur in der Welt in Berlin is part of an ongoing collaboration with a self-taught acoustic archaeologist, Uma Shankar Manchavadi, who's been both measuring the acoustic properties of ancient, or let's say pre-modern archaeological sites, primarily in India, somehow since the 90s, as well as building the technology, the ambisonic microphones that are required to do the work he needs to do, especially at a time when this was not affordable. So, I mean, somehow the question of the technology to measure the acoustic properties of sites before electronic amplification, there's a kind of tension that is perhaps interesting to kind of keep in mind. I'm not an acoustic archaeologist. I'm a writer and a curator working in the contemporary art context, but acoustic archaeology is somehow still a nascent discipline, even though maybe 2 decades onto like early conferences, I think also at TRI some years ago, is an interest in thinking through the acoustic properties of ancient archaeological sites, but also thinking through ancient musical instruments as a way of understanding, for example, in the case of archaeological sites, what might have happened there. And it is insofar as, following from what Pratna is saying, an attempt to kind of shift from the attention from the visual and the physical remains, which is somehow the kind of hegemony of the visual in the discourse of archaeology, insofar as its reliance on both structure and evidence, is something that gets opened up by both the approach and the attention to how sound moves in a space. That is at the core of what acoustic archaeology is about. And so the particular connection also to performance is somehow at the heart of what Uma Shankar has been doing, because the sites that he came to be interested in were potentially in some cases, performance sites, ritual performance, or, and the question of performance as also an extended terrain of whether it's a speech in a marketplace or a ritual chant in a cave. That event can only be that event if the acoustics of the space enable it to be that event, because before the advent of electronic amplification, microphones, loudspeakers, architecture, and the voice are the amplification devices. And so if, you might be be giving a speech, but, if the crowd can't hear you, then maybe it ain't that public speech. So, and what's been quite fascinating about the sites that Uma Shankar has been interested in, and which we have then had the kind of pleasure of going along to, both so as to measure them, but actually eventually for insofar as the exhibition we did also to perform in them, is that each site, they're dated to different eras and different kind of contexts. In some cases we know what is still performed there, but there might be changes that have been made, or the fact that the environment itself has changed, which influences how we interact with the performance. Like, say, the words are important, but the drums are really loud. And back in the day, perhaps you could hear that. You could hear the singing over the loud drums without any microphones. But now, because there's a city that has come around the temple, our hearing has adjusted. We still can hear, but if we did hear, we'd probably go crazy. So we don't hear the singing over the drums, but the singing is crucial to that performance tradition. So it's these kind of, kind of specific questions that are related to the specificity of the performance tradition. And in other cases, we don't even know whether the site was in fact a performance space, because perhaps the Archaeological Survey of India has concluded that this was a monastery. But these little chambers that are on the rock face are in fact resonant chambers, which enable your voice to carry crystal clear across the pane, right? And so in a way, if we kind of come back to the question of theater, then what Uma Shankar is proposing, both through the technological apparatus that he has been building. He built his first radio when he was 7 and 11. So this is also part of the practice, the question of techne, as, also the line between body and cultural techniques is somehow part of then the technology that enables the measurement to kind of happen, is that we can't just look for theaters in the landscape of the past that we have to listen to them. And it's only, you know, when we, that should, also because people were listening to the spaces they were building, you know, such that it could sound the way it needed to sound for the thing that they needed to do, perhaps. And so that is, I mean, that's largely the shift. And there's a kind of relay between, you know, the kind of technical question of, okay, you make a measurement, what do you do with this measurement? And the kind of research and more contextual, whether that's in relation to site or in relation to performance tradition, or in relation to the history of archaeology too, that the project kind of brings together. And the contributions to the dossier are not just writers who are responding, but actually collaborators of the project. The project is quite extensive in, you know, in who has made it and how it has come to be made. And it is articulated as a response to the propositions, both the political and performative propositions, insofar as what it might mean to listen to the past, as well as, the political and performative potential of the past that Uma Shankar's practice approach through thinking about acoustic archaeology might offer us.
It's really fascinating, and thank you for bringing so many different voices together in that piece. We don't have much time left, but if there are any questions, maybe you could drop them in the chat box. I'm going to stop sharing to kind of enable that. One other thing I would like to ask you in the very brief time we have left is, have you noticed any kinds of changes on or off stage in the relationship between sounds and bodies in the past year? Maybe this could be a quick fire round of any kind of impressions or responses to the panelists.
Well, maybe just a quick...
Well, I can jump in, Fintan. I don't know if you guys can hear me. Oh, is this an open question to our listeners?
No, it's to you and then to Teresa. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one of the huge things that I've noticed is the increased importance of the sound of voice. And I know myself, something that I have experienced today, you know, that you can disappear. Your voice can be erased quite instantaneously, and then trying to get back in. And I've seen that kind of echoed in very, very beautifully in some experimental work that's happened across the pandemic, where people are experimenting with absence and presence and using sound to communicate that really evocatively. So that was, yeah, something that I've noticed has been happening, and it's definitely due to our technological advancements, but also handicap.
Thank you. Maybe a very quick one from Teresa.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I really noticed that I sometimes feel like the co-presence of living bodies can be a little bit overestimated in the performance theory. But during the pandemic, I think we all really experienced how vital that is and how we are all missing it, I think, you know, even during this conference. So for me, that highlighted the difference really in having this sort of interaction through live sound and through co-presence of, you know, people in the same space. So, and I'm saying it as a critic of, you know, liveness debate. So this is, I think, something to take away from the pandemic. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Teresa, and thank you to all of you, for the panelists, for coming and speaking to us today, and also for assembling such a wonderfully rich special issue. Thanks to all of you who came to this discussion too, and I hope very much that you enjoy the issue, which should be with you in a couple of weeks. Enjoy the rest of the conference, everyone.
Thank you, Fintan.
Thank you.